very special subject. That's words of Sri Lankan origin in the Oxford English Dictionary, especially those introduced by Robert Knox. And Sir Richard Boyle will talk about it. I think it will be very interesting because when you talk about Sinhala language, it is one of the few languages that had written, say, or letters to write the language and continued up to now. You know, it's say Tripitaka was documented in the 1st century, and at that time there were only 19 letters, Brahmi letters. It was tried whether they can write Tripitaka words in using 19 say letters. It can be done. So that means they would have done it and continued. And also in Sri Lanka we have a very special place where handwriting of people from 6th century up to 15th century is available. Then we can see the chronological development of letters, calligraphy from that time to the 15th century. So we are very fortunate, you know, in language we can see how things have developed from early time up to now, because Dr. Dharanegala's excavation introduced some potsherds with Brahmi letters which are earlier than the normal ones. So therefore, you know, it's a language that has gone through long. Now, when the British took over, they also had a lot of access to things. I think our learned speaker will definitely introduce us all those things. Now I request Mr. Ismat Rahim to introduce the speaker.
Thank you. Well, I've known Richard Boyle for almost 30 years, so I've been asked to introduce the speaker. And we've been working on a few projects together and shared several sort of research on similar subjects like the one he's going to speak to you about. Richard is a British national, arrived in Sri Lanka in 1973 and worked with Lester James Pearce on The God King, and later scripted and produced feature films such as the British East of Elephant Rock and the Sri Lankan British Rampage. He then turned to specialist documentary scripting and production for UN agencies and NGOs, teamed with his wife Shamini, the director, until 1990. Subsequently, he has written many articles about Sri Lanka's culture, history, mainly the British colonial period, travel, destination, and the foreign films made within its shores. These have appeared in such UK publications as the Times Higher Education Supplement, Bookman, and Book Deal, and in Sri Lanka, in the Sunday Times, Serendip, and Options. His biography, DPT Silva, the Royal Jeweller of Southeast Asia, was published in Singapore in 1989. And Sinbad in Serendip, Strange Tales and Curious Aspects of Sri Lanka in Colombo in 2008. And the coffee table book Grand Hotel in Aurelia, which we both worked together and was authored by Richard. But of relevance is Knox's Words, which was published some years ago, a study of the words of Sri Lankan origin or association, first used in English literature by Robert Knox and recorded in the Oxford English Dictionary. It was published in 2004. It was the result of his research after his appointment as the Sri Lankan English consultant to the Oxford English Dictionary. In addition, Richard Boyle was the editor of the magazine Travel Sri Lanka from 2003 to 2008, a trustee of the Gratian Trust from 2005 to 2012, and contributing editor to Subcontinental magazine Hima South Asian from 2009 to 2012. So we invite Richard Ball to give us his lecture.
It should read words of Sri Lankan origin and association. The Sri Lankan words recorded in the Oxford English Dictionary, or the OED as I shall be referring to it, especially Knox's contribution, remained unknown until 1992. Why? The OED was so massive, 20 volumes, 30,000 pages, that such information would take years to access until its appearance on CD-ROM in 1992. Thus, only 2 decades ago, I would not have been able to stand here and deliver this talk to you. Pronunciation of singular words sometimes has to be juggled, depending on the context. Some words have been anglicized to a certain degree, so I will use such pronunciation in the context of the OED. Otherwise, I refer to them in their true form. And as a foreigner, I have to apologize for any wayward singular pronunciation. Finally, I must emphasize that I am just an enthusiastic amateur. I have no training in lexicology other than the excellent guidance given me by co-editor of the OED, Professor Edmund Weiner, over 15 years, the last 15 years. On behalf of the National Trust, I would like to start by wishing to thank the Studio Times for the provision of photographs of many of the nouns, the things that constitute Knox's words. Personally, I wish to thank the OED for allowing me to quote definitions, etymologies, illustrative quotations, and so on and so forth. And last but not least, I wish to thank my son Aswajit for preparing the PowerPoint, and Tara from the National Trust for making the arrangements for this talk. Browse through any English dictionary, and you will discover that a surprising number of words have been borrowed from other languages. In 1579, the poet Edmund Spenser complained, "So now they have made our English tongue a gallimaufry or hodgepodge of all other speeches." To make his point, Spenser employs a loan word, as they are called, for gallimaufry was borrowed from French. In fact, loan words have contributed to the richness and diversity of the English language and reflects its continually evolving nature. Many loan words were acquired during days of empire, when the British were introduced to a vast collection of lands and peoples. It was inevitable that the colonists encountered unfamiliar concepts, physical objects, geographical features, and fauna and flora. They required words to describe them, and, more often than not, they would borrow from the language of the native inhabitants. The Sinhala language has loaned its fair share of words to the colonial tongue. This is particularly so as the language was confined to less than 2 million people in the early 19th century, when certain words were borrowed by the British. Take a look in any concise English dictionary, and you will find at least 5 common words attributed to Sinhala. The first one, of course, is a little bit of a surprise, unless you've read my articles. Anaconda, or in Sinhala, Haenakandia. And in case you're asking why, it was the Dutch who made the mistake. Beriberi, the disease. Bowtree, Tourmalin, or Torlamalli, and Wanderoo, or Wanderoo. These can be said to have attained international usage in the 19th and 20th centuries. However, Investigation of the online and ongoing third edition of the OED reveals many other words of Sri Lankan origin or association. Adiga, Aya, Ayo, and that wasn't a lamentation. Buddha, Chena, Dagaba, Disava, Domba, Iluk, Kabaragoya, Kangani, Kitul, Kumbuk, Kurakan, Malkoha, Murunga, Pansala, Parangi, Patana, Perahera, Polsambo, Palonga, Poya, Puja, Ratamahatmya, Ratan, Rilawa, Talipot, Talipot leaf, Tikpalonga, Vedda, and finally Vihara. Closer scrutiny reveals, as far as fauna is concerned, a couple of species each of primate and snake, and a lone bird. Flora is well represented with various tree species and plants. Buddhism makes a proportionate contribution, with the name of the founder of the faith, an example of sacred architecture, a venerated tree, a lunar observance, a perennial ritual, a monastic dwelling, and a temple. The remainder comprises a bit of a mixed bag. 3 indigenous titles, 2 diseases, an aboriginal tribe, a condiment, a method of shifting agriculture, a geographical feature, and a gemstone. This list reflects the manner in which the British dipped into the indigenous word pool whenever circumstances dictated. Yet, even though this list contains a few archaic words, more than half are well represented in contemporary Sri Lankan life and Sri Lankan English, both written and oral. The following is aimed to demonstrate this representation. It is April, and from my study, I can hear the seasonal call of a malkoha, possibly sitting in either the nearby kumbuk or kitul trees. A photograph of Tisahami, the late Veda chieftain, hangs above my desk, and there is a 19th century print of a Wanderoo monkey in my sitting room. I ate a small loaf of kurakan for breakfast, and no doubt a polsambo will be prepared for lunch. A tikpalonga caused much consternation when found this morning in a neighboring compound. And being Poya Day tomorrow, the local vihara will be a focus of attention. Oil lamps will encircle the Dagaba. Devotees will pay homage at the Bo Tree, and I believe a perahera is planned. The OED also contains miscellaneous English words created largely as a result of British interaction with Ceylon. Beetle leaf, creeper, which in case you don't know is a trainee tea planter. Hook money, Candian, land leech, leech gator, Martha diamond, which is a variety of zircon, muskrat, nettle grub, a caterpillar which is a scourge of the tea bush, Sinhala, Sinhalese, shark charmer, the protector of pearl divers, Sri Lankan, not Sri Lankan Airlines, and talipot leaf. Finally, there are words of miscellaneous origin that are closely, if not exclusively, associated with the island, half of which were inherited from the Portuguese and the Dutch. Burger, Dutch, kabuk, Portuguese, calamanda, Dutch, carambola, Portuguese, corral, Spanish, jargoon, French, a smoky zircon, loris, French, marmalade, Portuguese, used for ceremonial sprinkling, mudlalia, Mudlali, Riksdola, and Sarong. There are many so-called Anglo-Indian words of disparate origin extant in Sri Lankan English recorded in the OED. However, they are not exclusive to this particular brand of English. being used in other variants spoken elsewhere on the Indian subcontinent. Such words include Almara, Portuguese, Arak, Arabic, Aya, Portuguese, Bandicoot, Telugu, Bata, Hindi, barking deer, English, beetle, Malayalam, brinjal, Portuguese, kajam, Javanese, cast, Portuguese, chunam, Hindi, cobra, Portuguese, qua, Tamil, copra, Malayalam, compound, surprisingly comes from Malay, custard apple, English, firefly, English, flying fox, English, gecko, Malay, hackari, Hindi, hopper, Tamil, jaggery, jungle, kachari, mahout, Hindi, monsoon, Arabic, mosquito, Spanish, mouse deer, English, paddy, Malay, pian, Portuguese, petar, Tamil, sari, Hindi, tank, Gujarati, tiffin, English, veranda, Portuguese, and wood apple, English. This vocabulary recorded in the OED reflects Sri Lanka's multilingual colonial experience and many-faceted national heritage. The latter is an accumulation of indigenous practices, neighboring influences, and further flung interactions brought about by the island's maritime position. In the mid-17th century, unsuspecting British sailors were captured on the northeast coast around Trincomalee by forces of Raja Singha II. They were confined to remote villages within the Kingdom of Kandy and had to adapt to an alien culture and challenging environment. Thus, they began to use names, mainly from Sinhala, for such things as popular food and prevalent fauna and flora, with no English equivalent. One of these sailors was, of course, Robert Knox, who spent nearly 20 years in the kingdom before he escaped in 1680 and returned to London. His An Historical Relation of Ceylon, published in 1681, included words from Adigar to Wandaroo, their first occurrence in English. Knox's autobiography was published together with his proposed second edition, known as the Interleaved Copy, in Colombo, 1989, thanks to the scholarship of J.H.O. Paulus. In his autobiography, Knox states he began to write his account of the island on the voyage home. In all the time of my captivity, I had neither pen, ink, nor paper, and now, as a man new born, I come into the world. So made it part of my business to learn to write, and thought this would be a fit subject to employ my pen on. The 12-month period from September 1680, when Knox returned to London, to September the following year, when his book was published, is relevant. It was a period of extraordinary activity and personal achievement on Knox's part, which involved public exposure and interaction with the highest echelons of society. He even had an audience with King Charles II. This was in complete contrast to the aimless as well as intellectually and socially bereft existence of his 2 decades in Ceylon. The process of Knox's reintegration began less than a week after returning to England, when his brother James took him to Garraway's, one of London's famous coffee shops. James Knox, a talented painter of miniatures, was a regular patron and an acquaintance of the eminent men who assembled there, such as Edmund Halley, Robert Hooke, Samuel Pepys, and Christopher Wren. James Knox propelled his brother into the limelight. Now, could I stop here because the pictures have got out of order? Yes. This is Knox. Yeah, that's Garraway's. We just talked about Garraway's, and there's an interior. Next one? Yes, okay. Then Robert Hooke. Right, stay there. There is enough evidence to suggest that Robert Hooke edited Knox's manuscript. The difference in style, proficiency of language, and consistency in spelling between Knox's book and his correspondence is marked indeed. If this theory is correct, it does not diminish Knox's work, for the power of his writing is in the character and detail of his descriptions, the essence of which only he could convey. Nor does it call into question Knox's first use of the words of Sri Lankan origin or association. In the 21st century, an historical relation of Ceylon is still considered the most remarkable account of the island of the period in English, and remains an invaluable storehouse of information for the researcher. Knox's contribution to the OED goes unnoticed, even though the dictionary contains 98 illustrative quotations from an historical relation of Ceylon. This puts Knox on a par with a major writer such as William Blake, who appears remarkably underrepresented with only 112 illustrative quotations to his name. Incidentally, it is no great surprise to discover that Shakespeare is the most quoted author in the OED. No less than 33,300 quotations have been taken from the bard's work. As illustrative quotations, as I call them, will be encountered throughout the rest of this talk, it is essential that they are clearly understood. They are quotations from text or speech that are added to an entry to help explain and reinforce a word's meaning or use, any trends in spelling, and also to date the first usage. This latter aspect is, of course, vital in pursuance of Knox's words. Now, 36 of the 98 illustrative quotations of Knox's are references to words for which he is credited with the first occurrence in English. These are either English words with unusual senses or foreign words which, with a few exceptions, are of singular origin. These core Knox words, as I call them, will be dealt with in detail later in this talk. There are 11 English words in this list, many of which are obsolete. They are bound, limit or boundary, committee, one of the 24 directors of the East India Company, dodge, to move and fro about, around, or behind any obstacle to elude a pursuer, drill, to churn, fish pot, a wicker basket for catching fish, impose, to place authoritatively, reeve, to pass a rod through an aperture, shot, to load a firearm with shot, tarish, having a taste like tar, truck, to carry goods about for sale, which sounds quite modern, and warn, in fertile land. The Sri Lankan context of some of these words is worth noting. Fish pot is used by Knox to refer to the pot-shaped fish baskets of freshwater fishermen, and the verb reeve to explain how such fishermen string their catch together by passing a rattan through the gills of each fish. 47 illustrative quotations refer to words of English origin with a Sri Lankan setting that are not first occurrence. Some of these quotations are to familiar words, but with unfamiliar and mostly obsolete meanings. Such words include clap, to laid hold of promptly, dead, unsaleable goods, equal, to make ground level, physical, having a taste like medicine, stream, ray of light or tail of a comet, stubborn, hard, stiff, rigid material, and use, to practice the calling of a sailor. Other quotations are to less familiar, but once again, mostly obsolete English words. Examples are bandy, a curved club used in the antiquated game of bandy, contentation, satisfaction, illy, in an ill manner, stander, a person of long standing, tarriance, temporary residence, and unshale, to unhusk. Although the origin of these words has no relevance to Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan context in which they are used is often of interest. For example, Knox uses the word clap to elaborate the mistaken belief that the python uses its anal spurs to clasp hold of its prey, and the adjective stubborn to explain the rigidity of the leaf of the talipot. The verb equal is used to describe the preliminary leveling of ground necessary in the making of a paddy field, and the adjective physical to characterize the medicinal smell of a certain shrub. Then there is the adjective tarish, which is used by Knox to describe the tar-like taste of the honey of a small bee, and the adjective worn to describe the land infertility caused where jasmine flowers were grown intensively for the king's pleasure. The first occurrence of 4 words for which Knox provides an illustrative quotation, and hungry, in a hungry state, atomy, a living skeleton, entertainment, a formal or elegant meal, and rarely, exceptionally. They're all attributed to Shakespeare. So this is the broad picture of Knox's OED contribution, which is the biggest of writers of books concerning Sri Lanka. As E.F.C. Ludovic remarked, of all the records of Ceylon in English, whether one thinks of novels or documents, the most impressive is Knox's book. What have we to place beside it? Only Tennant's omniscience and Leonard Woolf's sensitiveness. The representation of English literature pertaining to Sri Lanka in the OED supports Ludovic's idea of a preeminent triumvirate. In fact, there are 111 illustrative quotations by Tennant, mostly from his Ceylon, 1859, contained in the OED. 13 more than Knox's tally of 98. But the majority of Knox's core words are of Sinhala or Sanskrit origin, while Tennant's are mostly compounds of English words. Therefore, the most quoted author in respect of words of Sri Lankan origin or association is Robert Knox. Leonard Woolf's total number of illustrative quotations from The Village in the Jungle, 1913, is just 13. The next on the list is Ralph Pearis, whose Sinhalese Social Organization, 1956, produces 12. Major Forbes's 11 Years in Ceylon, 1840, produces 7. And Robert Percival's An Account of the Island of Ceylon, 1803, produces 5. But now is the time to turn to the words of Sri Lankan origin or association introduced to English by Knox in 1681, and which, during the period from 1879, when the OED started, to the present day, have been considered sufficiently embedded in the language to warrant inclusion in the dictionary, and I refer to them as Knox's core words. The year that work began in earnest, a public appeal was made by the editor of the first edition, James Murray, for volunteers to trawl through books, including An Historical Relation of Ceylon, for words. This is revealed in the OED's internal document, List of Readers and Books Read by Them for the Dictionary, 1879 to 1884. The reader's name for An Historical Relation of Ceylon is D. Ferguson, Colombo, Ceylon. Donald Ferguson. Donald Ferguson was a fine scholar with an interest in Knox that culminated in Captain Robert Knox's contribution towards a biography, which was privately printed in 1896-97 and limited to just 100 copies. And thankfully, Mr. Ismet Rahim has a copy which I was able to borrow. Ferguson made a most relevant discovery when he stumbled on what researchers term Robert Knox Sinhalese vocabulary, which contains 767 words among Robert Hooke's papers at the British Museum Library. Thus, it is appropriate that Ferguson contributed 13 core words included in the OED's first edition. This was published in 10 volumes between 1888 and 1928. The words concerned are betel leaf, bow tree, Buddha, Disava, Kitul, muskrat, puja, rattan, rillo, talipot, tikbalonga, vedda, and wanderu. The remaining core words total 12. Adigar, which has only recently been added to the OED, betel nut, kabaragoya, kangani, kurakan, iluk, landleech, murunga, palonga, talipot leaf, torana, and vihara. These have entered the OED mostly as a result of the research that produced the 20-volume second edition in 1989, which comprised nearly 300,000 entries. Usage of the majority of the 25 core Knox words, especially those of singular origin, is restricted to Sri Lanka. Adigar, Iluk, Kitul, Gurakan, Murunga, Perahera, Palonga, Tikbalonga, and Landleech can also be added to that list. Some have an Indian origin and regional usage, Kangani, Torana, Vihara. Others of singular and regional origin have attained international usage in the 19th and 20th centuries. Betel leaf, bow tree, Buddha, puja, rattan, and wanderu. This is reflected in their widespread inclusion in concise English dictionaries. Now, of all these Knox words, Buddha is the most universal and the one most associated with Sri Lanka. As I have written earlier, it is apt that Knox's legacy should include the first occurrence in English literature of a word so hallowed by such a large percentage of the island's population. At the commencement of the third edition, around the turn of this century, another appeal was made for volunteers by the editors of the OED, John Simpson and my guru, Edmund Weiner. It was an appeal that I answered. As the entries for words of Sri Lankan origin or association were often underrepresented by illustrative quotations from literature concerning colonial Ceylon, I set myself the task of reading some 100 books on the island from the 18th and 19th centuries, the 19th and 20th centuries. In this way, I was able to harvest a great many quotations regarding the Knox words in the OED, and information regarding changes in spelling and frequency of use. In this part of my talk, Knox's Words, the title of my book on the subject, I shall introduce the entries concerning the core words, those first brought to the English language by Knox. The system of revision of entries is non-alphabetical, and only a few core words have been upgraded to the third edition standard so far. As a result, 4 core word entries still do not recognize that Knox provided the first occurrence in English, although I have forwarded the evidence to the OED a decade or more ago. But then, the projected time span of the creation of the third edition is 36 years, which means that many people who are working on it, perhaps including myself, will never see the end of it. By then, the dictionary will have doubled in size to 600,000 entries. So now, alphabetically, Adigar is the first core word, and also a new OED entry, as I mentioned, published in 2011, well, relatively new. I advocated for the inclusion of Adigar as a dictionary already recorded 4 less significant indigenous ranks: Disava, Kangani, Mudlia, and Ratamahatmaya. The title is featured extensively in English literature pertaining to Sri Lanka. In fact, Adigar is more prevalent than the other 4 ranks. Deemed now historical by the OED, sense number 1 is defined: in the former Kingdom of Kandy in Sri Lanka, a title of a chief minister and royal advisor. Subsequently, during British colonial rule, an honorary title, frequently with preceding ordinal number indicating rank. The honorary office of First Adigar fell into abeyance upon the death of the most recent incumbent in 1963. Now, I believe this is an excellent example of the depth and structure of the 3rd edition definitions. Adigar is not an important word, of course, in the general context of things, but as you will have heard, it's a very comprehensive definition. Anyway, the first occurrence in English is by Knox. There are 2 who are the greatest and highest officers in the land. They are called Adigars. I may term them chief judges, under whom is the government of the cities and the countries, also in the vacancy of other governors. Okay, the next word is beetle, published in 1887, just after the dictionary started, and not yet updated. It bears the definition: the leaf of a plant, which in South Asia is wrapped around a few parings of the areca nut and a little shell lime and chewed as a masticatory. This, in contrast, is a typical example of a 1st edition definition written within the first decade of the project. Sense 1C of the word covers combinations, in this case beetle leaf, and the sole illustrative quotation is by Knox. The tree that bears the beetle leaf grows like ivy. Sense 2 is beetle nut, defined as the nut or fruit of the areca palm, so misnamed by Europeans because it is chewed with the beetle leaf. Knox provides the first occurrence, of course. Beetle nuts, 4,000 at 9 pence, current price. Not bad, no? Botry was also published in 1887 and not yet updated. The etymology provided is Sinhalese, bow, corruption of Pali, bodhi, and defined thus: the ficus religiosa, specifically allied to the banyan. The first occurrence is by Knox. This tree they call Bogaha, we the God tree. The entry for Buddha has been upgraded and was published in 2013. The definition reads: also the Buddha, a title for Siddhartha Gautama or Sakyamuni, a spiritual teacher from South Asia on whose teachings Buddhism is based, and who is believed to have been born in what is now Nepal and flourished in what is now Bihar, northeastern India, during the 5th century BC. Also, a title given to any Buddhist teacher regarded as having attained full awakening or enlightenment. The first occurrence is, of course, by Knox. The Buddhu, a great god among them. Furthermore, the compound defined as chiefly in the senses belonging to or characteristic of Buddhism, or of or resembling Buddha, reveals the first occurrences by Knox. The first and highest order of priests are the priests of the Buddhu god. The entry for Disava was published in 1933 and is not yet updated. The etymology given is Sinhalese Disava, the simple definition, a governor of a district of Ceylon. Knox provides the first occurrence. He gives order to his disarvers or governors of the countries to choose out boys. Iluk is the first word in the OED not recognized as having been first used in English by Knox. But the entry, published in 1976, has not been updated. The etymology, curiously, just says singular, and the definition given, the name used in Sri Lanka for a coarse grass, Imperata cylindrica. The first quotation is dated 1864. However, in his interleaved copy, that's the proposed second edition, Knox writes, "The hills generally are stony barren land, bearing only iluk, or such flage grass." The entry for Kabaragoya, published in 1976 and not yet updated, bears the definition, "The water monitor, Varana salvator, a large lizard found in southeastern Asia." It is surprising the entry states the etymology of Kabaragoya as unknown. It is, of course, comprised of two singular words, kabara, speckled, and goya, lizard. Knox provides the first occurrence. "There is a creature here called Kabaragoyan, resembling an alligator. The biggest may be 5 or 6 feet long, speckled black and white." The entry for Kangani was also published in 1976 and not yet updated. The definition reads, "An overseer or headman of a gang of local laborers in Sri Lanka, southern India, and Malaya." This does not reflect other meanings of the word in the past in Sri Lanka, such as a military headman and a type of police officer, I am told. Kangani is the second word not recognized as having been first used in the English language by Knox. The first quotation is dated 1817, but Knox writes, "Konkona, an overseer, who is to oversee all things." The entry for Kittul, published in 1901 and not fully updated, contains the definition, "The jaggery palm, Caryota urens, hence a strong black fiber obtained from the leaf stalks of this, used for making ropes, brushes, etc." Knox's quotation reads, "The next tree is the kittul. It groweth straight, but not so tall or big as a coconut tree." The entry for Kurakan was published in 1976 and is not fully updated. The definition, the singular name for a type of cereal grass, Eleusine coracana, which is extensively grown in chainas in Sri Lanka, where flour from its grain forms a staple food of the poorer villagers. Now, of course, it's become a health food for less poorer urbanites. Knox supplies the first occurrence in English. "There are divers other sorts of corn which serve the people for food in the absence of rice. There is korakan, which is a small seed like mustard seed. This they grind to meal or beat in a mortar, and so make cakes of it." Land leech is the third word not recognized as having been first used in English by Knox. Defined as a leech of the genus Hemodipsa, abounding in Ceylon, the only quotation is by Tennant. But Knox writes, "Here are an abundance of small land leeches, which, when they travel, do continually suck blood out of their feet and legs, they being very numerous and apt to stick to the skin." The entry for Marunga, new to the OED and published in 2003, was suggested by me, and I supplied all but one of the illustrative quotations. The definition, in Sri Lanka, the horseradish tree, Moringa oleifera, also the fruit of this tree, the ben nut. Knox writes, They have several other sorts of fruits which they dress and eat with their rice, called caruella, vatakul, morongo, etc. Muskrat. In the updated entry for muskrat, published in 2003, sense 2a is defined thus: any of various other small mammals with a musky smell, such as a musk shrew or a desman. The first occurrence provided by Knox reads, they have a sort of rats they call muskrats because they smell strong of musk. The entry for Parahera has also been updated and published in 2005. The etymology given is singular parihara, in vernacular pronunciation Parahera. The definition, which is a new one and therefore quite lengthy. In Sri Lanka, a religious procession, specifically a 10-day series of torchlit processions occurring annually in the town of Kandy. Also, a secular procession or parade of celebration. The processions in Kandy occur in the Hindu month of Ashadha and fall in July or August, depending on the full moon. Drummers, dancers, acrobats, and richly decorated elephants process with a relic of a sacred tooth believed to come from the Buddha. Knox fittingly provides the first occurrence: that they may honor these gods and procure their aid and assistance, they do yearly in the month of June or July at a new moon observe a solemn feast and general meeting called Peraha. The entry for Palonga is a new one published in 2006. As a result of my suggestion, it was needed as there was an existing entry for Tikpalonga and both names are in common use. The definition: in Sri Lanka, a venomous snake, specifically the Russell's viper, Daboiai russellii. Knox's first occurrence reads, there is another venomous snake called Palongo, the most venomous of all, that kills cattle. Two sorts of them have I seen, the one green, the other a reddish-gray, full of white rings along the side and about 5 or 6 feet long. Puja. The entry for Puja has been fully updated and was published in 2007. Sense 1a is defined: in South Asia, a religious ceremony, a ceremonial offering to a god, an act of private or public worship. Knox's quotation reads, in this puja or sacrifice, the king seems to take delight. Sense 1b is defined: to do, also make, puja, to perform an act of worship, to make an offering to a god, also in extended use. Knox provides the first occurrence for this as well. They reckon the chief points of goodness to consist in giving to the priests, in making pujas, sacrifices to their gods, in forbearing shedding the blood of any creature. The entry for Rattan has been updated and was published in 2008, but it has meant the loss of a core word. Sense 1a is defined as a section or length of the stem of a rattan plant used for binding, making cane furniture, etc. In the second edition of the OED, Knox was credited with the first occurrence. Everything is tied with rattans and other strings, but what is termed an antedating has been found from 1606. However, for sense 2a, any of numerous climbing palms of the genus Calamus, noted for their long, slender, flexible, and often thorny stems, occurring chiefly in Indonesia and other parts of Southeast Asia. Knox remains unchallenged. Rattans grow in great abundance upon this island. The entry for Rillo has been updated and published in 2010. The etymology is singular, Rilava. The word is deemed chiefly historical and rare, and the definition, Definition is, in Sri Lanka, the toque macaque, Macacus sinica. Knox provides the first occurrence. This sort of monkeys have no beards, white faces, and long hair on the top of their heads. They call these rillos. Note that the illustration is from an historical relation of Ceylon. The theory is that James Knox executed the drawings as he owed his brother some inheritance. The entry for Talipot was published in 1910 and is not fully updated. The etymology given is Sinhalese talapata. The definition for sense A, a South Indian fan palm, native in Sri Lanka and Malabar, noted for its great height and its enormous fan-shaped leaves, which are used as a material to write on. Knox's quotation reads, "The first is a talipot. It is as big and tall as a ship's mast and very straight, bearing only leaves, talipot leaf." Sense B is the attributive talipot leaf. Once again, the first occurrence is by Knox, a fan made of the talipot leaf. Note that once again, the illustration is from Knox. Sinhalese tit palonga, from titta, speck, freckle, spot, mark, and palonga, viper. The definition is a venomous snake of India and Sri Lanka, the chain viper or necklace snake, Daboia russeli. The editors have used the same quotation from Knox as that for the palonga entry. There is another venomous snake called palonga, the most venomous of all. The entry for Toran or Torana was published in 1913 and has not been updated. The definition reads, a sacred Buddhist gateway of wood or stone, consisting of a pair of uprights with one or more, often three, crosspieces, sometimes elaborately carved. This is the fourth word in the OED not recognized as having been first used in English by Knox. The sole quotation given is dated 1866 and has no relevance to Sri Lanka. However, Knox writes, upon a special and good day, for which the astrologers are consulted, the king washes his head, which is a very great solemnity among them. The palace is all adorned with toranas, and The palace is all adorned with toranas, a sort of triumphal arches that make a very fine show. It is interesting to note that Ananda Kumaraswamy used the term triumphal arch to describe the torana. When the definition is revised, that they were also erected for festive occasions needs to be added. The entry for Vedda was published in 1916 and has not been fully updated. The etymology given is Sinhalese Vedda, archer, hunter, and the definition, a member of an Aboriginal people inhabiting the forest districts of Sri Lanka. Note that some revision has occurred with Ceylon changed to Sri Lanka. Knox's quotation reads, in this land are many of these wild men. They call them Vaddas. Note that the illustration is from Knox. The entry for Vihara was published in 1933 and has not been updated. The definition, in Sri Lanka and, historically, India, a Buddhist temple or monastery. Knox's quotation reads that their temples are styled vihars. Many of the vihars are endowed and have farms belonging to them. Well, we come to the final Knox core word, Wanderoo. The entry was published in 1921 and has not been updated. The etymology given, Sinhalese Wanderoo, monkey, cognate with Hindi Bandar, Sanskrit Vanara, believed to mean literally forest dweller. The definition reads, a name properly belonging to the langur monkeys inhabiting Sri Lanka, but until recently almost always misapplied to the lion-tailed macaque of Malabar. And Knox's quotation is, monkeys, some so large as our English spaniel dogs, of a darkish grey colour and black faces with great white beards. There is another sort, just of the same bigness, but milk white both in body and face. This sort they call in their language wanderos. Note once again that the illustration is from Knox. Thank you.